Welcome to Red Novel. Make sure to like and subscribe for more updates.
The knight in full plate armor stood before the girl and her little sister, his sword raised high. His blade gleamed in the sun, and he poised himself, ready to end their lives in a single merciful stroke. The girl squeezed her eyes tightly shut and bit her lower lip. She had never asked for this. She had been forced into her present circumstances. If only she had some strength, she might have resisted the enemy in front of her and fled. However, the girl did not have that strength. Thus, there could only be one outcome to this situation. That would be the girl's death at this very place. The longsword fell, and yet there was no pain. The girl gingerly opened the eyes which had been squeezed shut. The first thing she saw was the suddenly motionless longsword. Then, she saw the sword's owner. The knight in front of her was frozen in place, his eyes looking somewhere off to the girl's side. His completely defenseless posture clearly displayed the fear that filled him. As though drawn by the knight's gaze, the girl could not help but turn and look in the same direction as him. And so, the girl gazed upon despair. What she saw was darkness. It was an infinitesimally thin, yet unfathomably deep blackness. It was a half oval of obsidian that seemed to protrude from the earth. It was a mysterious sight that filled the ones watching it with a powerful sense of unease. Was it a door? The girl could not help but think so after she saw what lay before her. As her heart lurched, the girl's conjecture was confirmed. Something seemed to be coming out of that shadowy passage. And in the moment that it resolved itself in her eyes, "Hey, a deafening shriek came from the girl. It was an opponent which humanity could not overcome. Twin points of crimson light burned brightly within the empty eye sockets of a bleached skull. Those 2 points of light coldly scanned the girl and the others present like a predator sizing up its prey. Within its fleshless hands it grasped a magic staff that seemed divine in nature, yet inspired dread in equal measure. It was like a crystallization of all the beauty in the world. It wore an intricately detailed black robe, and it resembled nothing so much as an incarnation of death, born from the darkness of another world. In an instant, the air seemed to freeze. It was as though time itself had stood still in the wake of a supreme being's advent. The girl forgot to breathe, as if the sight had stolen her soul away. Then, in this silent realm, the girl began choking and gasped for air. This avatar of death must have manifested itself in order to guide her to the land of the dead. It was only natural to think so. But then, the girl who thought this way suddenly realized that something was wrong. That was because the knight who had been planning to kill her from behind was now completely still. "Ah!" A cry that sounded like a wail crept into her ears. From whose mouth had that sound come? It felt like it could have come from hers, or that of her little sister, shivering in fright, or from the mouth of the knight that had been about to kill her. A skeletal hand slowly extended itself, its fingers spreading as though reaching for something, and they moved past the girl, toward the knight behind her. She wanted to look away from it, but fear kept her gaze in place. She had the feeling that if she averted her eyes, she would see a far more horrible sight instead. Grasp heart! The incarnation of death clenched its fists, and the girl heard the sound of crunching metal from behind her. Though she was afraid to take her eyes away from the figure of death, curiosity got the better of her and the girl wrenched her eyes away, whereupon saw the body of the knight. He was sprawled motionless on the ground, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He was dead. There was no doubt that he was dead. The danger that had almost claimed the girl was no more. But this was no cause for celebration. The death that stalked her had merely taken a more concrete shape. That death drew close to the girl, who watched it with terrified eyes. The darkness in her field of vision grew ever larger. "It's going to swallow me up." As the girl thought this, she clutched her sister tightly to herself. The notion of escape no longer existed within the girl's head. If her opponent were human, she might be able to cling to some faint hope and struggle desperately for her life, but the being before her shattered that hope like spun glass. "Please, at least let me die without pain." That was all the girl could hope for. Her shuddering sister hugged her tightly. All she could do was apologize for her weakness, for being unable to protect her sister's life. She prayed that her sister would not be lonely as they went on to the afterlife, because they would be traveling there together. The End and the Beginning. Part 1. In the year 2138 there was a term MMORPG. That word was an acronym for Dive Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. These games were played by connecting a dedicated console to the brain via a neuronal nano-interface, an intracerebral nanocomputer network created from the fusion of cyber and nanotechnology. These were games that allowed one to enter a virtual world and experience it as though it were real life. And among the myriad MMORPGs that thronged the market, one of them stood head and shoulders above the others: Yggdrasil. This game had been painstakingly developed and released 12 years ago, in 2126. Compared to other MMORPGs of the time, Yggdrasil's selling point was player freedom. It had over 2,000 basic and advanced job classes. Every class had a maximum of 15 levels, and so in order to reach the overall level cap of 100, one would need to take at least 7 different classes. However, players could take as many classes as they wanted as long as they met each class's prerequisites. A player could even take 100 classes at level 1 each, although that was very inefficient. As such, in this system, it was virtually impossible to make identical characters unless one was deliberately trying to do so. In addition, one could use various creator tools sold separately to fully customize one's armor, weaponry, flavor text, appearance, and other cosmetic settings. A vast playing field awaited its players. There were 9 worlds in total: Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. It boasted a massive world, numerous classes, and freely customizable appearances. These features ignited the creative spirits of its Japanese players and sparked what would later be known as a stylistic revolution. So popular was it that whenever the word MMORPG was mentioned in Japan, listeners would immediately think of Yggdrasil. Still, all these were things of the past now. A gigantic table carved of gleaming black stone sat in the center of the room, surrounded by 41 luxurious chairs. However, most of those seats were empty. Once, every single place had been filled, but now only 2 were occupied. One of the seated people was clothed in a magnificent black academic robe, edged in violet and gold. The collar seemed excessively gaudy, but somehow it fit the overall design. However, the exposed head was a bare skull. Points of dark red light glowed in its large eye sockets, and behind that skull glowed a halo of black radiance. The being in the other seat was not human either, merely a mass of a black, sticky substance. Its tar-like surface roiled and writhed continuously, never staying in the same shape for more than a second. The former was an Overlord, the highest ranked of those magic casters who had become undead in order to learn the most potent spells. The latter was an Elder Black Ooze, which boasted the most powerful corrosive ability of the slime families. One might encounter these monsters in the most difficult dungeons. Overlords could use powerful spells of the highest tiers of magic, while Elder Black Oozes were dreaded for their ability to degrade weapons and armor. However, they were not game monsters but players. In Yggdrasil, players could choose their character races from 3 broad groups: humanoid, demi-human, and heteromorphic. Humanoids were the basic player type and comprised humans, dwarves, wood elves, and the like. Demi-humans tended to be ugly but possessed superior attributes to humanoids. Examples of demi-humans were goblins, beastmen, ogres, and so on. Finally, heteromorphic races had monstrous abilities, but despite their stats being generally higher than those of other races, they also possessed various drawbacks. There were around 700 playable races in total, including the advanced versions of these races. Naturally, the Overlord and Elder Black Ooze were among the high-tier heteromorphic races that were playable. The Overlord, who was speaking at the moment, did not move his mouth. That was because even the most advanced MMORPGs of the time still could not overcome the technological hurdle of properly modeling the changes on a character's face in response to emotions and speech. It's really been a while, Hiro-san. Although this is the last day of Yggdrasil, I didn't expect you to show up. Indeed it has, Momonga-san. The 2 of them spoke with the voices of grown men, but compared to the voice of the former, the latter's words lacked force, or perhaps it could be said that they lacked energy. You stopped coming online after you changed your job, Earl. So how long has it been? About 2 years? Ah, seems about right. Wah, it's been so long. This is bad. I've been doing so much overtime recently that my sense of time is starting to go weird. That's really bad, right? Are you okay? My body? Well, it's a mess. I haven't had to see a doctor yet, but I'm almost there. It's really bad. A lot of times, I feel like I want to run away from it all, but then I think about how I need money to live and then I go back to work like a whipped slave. Ew. The Overlord, Momonga, lowered his head in an "I can't take it" gesture. That's terrible. As though following up on Momonga's comment, Hiro delivered a grim monologue, his words laced with an unimaginable reality. The 2 of them griped loudly about the foolishness they encountered in their working lives. Subordinates who did not know how to report, communicate, and discuss things, spreadsheets that changed by the day, scoldings by their superiors for not meeting various KPIs, working late every day until they could not go home, gaining weight because of their irregular lifestyles, and the increasing amounts of medicine they had to take every day. Hirohiro's grievances burst forth like a broken dam, and Momonga lent his ear to him. A lot of people were averse to discussing reality in a virtual world. It was fairly normal for people to not want to talk about their offline lives in a game. However, this was not so for the two of them. The guild they belonged to, a group that was founded and managed by players, Ainsul Gown, had two conditions that each of its members had to fulfill. The first was that everyone had to be a working member of a society. The other was that they had to play heteromorphic characters. Because of these rules, the topics they discussed often revolved around their jobs in the real world. Any member of the guild would field these questions, and as such, the conversation between the two could be considered standard fare for the guild. After about 10 minutes, the torrent of words that flowed from Hirohiro dwindled to a trickle. "I'm sorry for making you listen to my whining. I can't complain much, Earl." The place corresponding to Hirohiro's head seemed to sway, as though he were bowing in apology. Thus, Momonga replied, "Don't worry about it, Hirohiro-san. I made you come online despite you being busy, so listening to your complaints is only expected. I'll hear you out, no matter how many you have." Hirohiro seemed to have recovered some of his old energy, and with a somewhat more energetic laugh, he replied, "Ah, I'm grateful for that, Momonga-san. I'm glad I could meet a friend after signing on." "I'm very happy to hear you say that too. Although it's about time for me to log off." Hirohiro's tentacle waggled in midair, as though he were operating something. Indeed, he was operating a menu. "You're right, it is getting pretty late. I'm sorry about this, Momonga-san." Momonga sighed gently, as though he didn't want Hirohiro to sense the regret in his heart. "Well, if it's like that, then it's a shame time flies so fast when you're having fun. I really did want to stay with you to the end, but I'm about to fall asleep." "Ah, well, you do sound pretty tired. Then, you should log out soon and have a good rest." "I'm really sorry, Momonga-san. Although, how long do you plan to stay, guild leader?" "I intended to stay on until I was automatically logged out once the server shut down. Since it's still a ways off, maybe someone might come by in the meantime." "Is that so still? I really didn't expect this place to be so well preserved." At this moment, Momonga was grateful that he had no way to show his expressions. If he did, Hirohiro would probably have seen his face twist up. Even then, his voice would betray how he truly felt, so Momonga kept quiet in order to suppress the feelings surging up within him. He had worked hard to maintain the guild precisely because he had built it up along with everyone else, but hearing words like these from one of his guild members sparked a mix of complicated emotions in his heart. However, these feelings dispersed like mist as Hirohiro continued. "Momonga-san, you must have kept the guild going as it's later so we could come back to it at any time. Thank you very much. It was a guild built by everyone, so it's my job as guildmaster to keep things going so that the members can come back at any time." "Yes. We had fun with the game because you were our guildmaster, Momonga-san. I hope that when we meet again, it'll be in Yggdrasil Roma too. I haven't heard anything about a second game, but like you said, I'd be glad if we could meet like that. I'll look forward to it. I'm having trouble staying awake. I think I'll log off first. I'm glad I could meet you in the end. Good night." Momonga wanted to say something, but he hesitated for a moment, and then he spoke. "I was very happy to meet you too. Good night." A smiley appeared near Hirohiro's head. Since characters in Yggdrasil could not express emotions through their facial expressions, they used emoticons instead. Momonga worked his control interface and produced a similar smiley. Hirohiro's last words were, "Let's meet up again somewhere." And so, the last of the 3 guild members to come online tonight vanished. Silence descended once more. It was as though nobody had ever been here in the first place. Nothing was left behind. Momonga looked at the place where Hirohiro had been sitting, and he muttered the words he wanted to say. "Today's the last day of the game. I know you're tired, but we'll never have a chance like this again. Why don't we stay together until the end?" Of course, there was no response, because Hirohiro had already returned to reality. Huh. Momonga's sigh came from the bottom of his heart. In the end, it was better that it had remained unsaid. During their brief exchange, he could already tell how tired Hirohiro was from the sound of his voice. Still, despite his fatigue, Hirohiro had still responded to the email he had sent and logged on for the last day of Yggdrasil before it closed down. He should have been grateful enough for that. Asking him to stay on would not just have been a matter of being thick-skinned, but actively causing him trouble. Momonga stared at the seat Hiro had occupied until just now, and then turned to look at the other 39 seats. Those were the places where his old comrades had once sat. After going a circle around the table, Momonga returned his eyes to Hiro's place. Let's meet up again somewhere, huh? Let's meet up again somewhere. See you again. He had heard these words several times before, but they had never come true. Nobody had ever returned to Yggdrasil. When and where will we meet again? Momonga's shoulders shook violently, and the words he could no longer hold back exploded forth. Are you kidding me? He pounded the table as he shouted. The Yggdrasil system registered this action as an attack, and began the complex calculations of Momonga's barehanded attack strength against the table's defensive strength to determine the final total of damage inflicted. In the end, the area Momonga had struck emitted a simple 0. This is the great tomb of Nazarick that we built together. How could you abandon it just like that? After he shouted the words in his heart, the only thing left in there was emptiness. No, that's not right. They didn't abandon it lightly, they simply made the choice between reality and fantasy. It couldn't be helped. Nobody would betray the guild. Everyone who made that decision must have found it painful. Momonga muttered like he was trying to convince himself, and then he stood up. He walked toward the wall, where an elaborately decorated magic staff was kept. 7 serpents twined around the body of the staff, which resembled the Karakian carried by Hermes Trismegistus. The serpent's mouths gaped open in agony, and each mouth held a gem of a different color. The grip was exquisitely carved out of crystal and glowed with blue light. Anyone would be able to recognize the staff as a supremely high-quality item, and it was a guild weapon that was unique to this guild. One could call it the symbol of Ain's Ul Gown. This staff, which should have been a treasure held by the guildmaster, was instead kept in this room as a decoration. That was because there was nothing else which represented the guild quite like this. Guild weapons were typically kept hidden away in safe places and not used for their tremendous powers because a guild would be disbanded if its associated guild weapon was destroyed. Even Ain's Ul Gown, a guild which existed at the peak of Yggdrasil, was no exception to this. This was the reason why the weapon had been kept here, and Momonga had never touched it, despite the fact that it had been tailor-made to complement his abilities. Momonga extended a hand to the staff but stopped halfway. This was because at this moment, in the last few minutes before Yggdrasil shut down for good, he realized that soon the glorious memories he had made with his comrades would be lost forever, like tears and rain. The confusion he felt over this made him hesitate as he struggled to come to a decision. Everyone had adventured every day with the sole purpose of assembling the guild weapon. Back then, they had held contests to see who could collect more raw materials more quickly, and there had been many disputes over the appearance of weapon. But slowly, after everyone's opinions were gathered, the weapon gradually took shape. That period of time had been the prime of Ain's Ul Gown, when all his glorious memories had been made. People had dragged themselves online after a grueling day at work, others had argued with their wives because they played until they neglected their families, and some even left and said they had taken special leave to stay home from work and log on to the game. There were times when they had spent entire days doing nothing but talking about silly things for amusement. There were times when they would draw up plans for adventures, and times when they went looking for treasure. They had also mounted raids on enemy guilds' home bases and laid siege to their strongholds. Once they had been attacked by a world-class enemy, an immensely powerful, hidden boss monster, and the guild had nearly been destroyed as a result. They had also discovered many previously unknown resources, and they had placed all sorts of monsters in their guild base in order to eliminate invading players. However, 9 of them were left as of today. Of the 41 members of the guild, 37 of them had quit. The other 3 were still registered as members of the guild, but Momonga had already lost count of the number of days since they had last come here. Momonga opened a system console and connected to the developer's website to inspect the official guild rankings. Right now, there were just under 800 guilds in Yggdrasil. In the past, they had ranked as high as the 9th place, but now, as of the last day of the game, they were in the 29th place. At their lowest, they had fallen to 48th place. The reason why their ranking had not fallen even further was not because of Momonga's efforts, but because of the items left behind by his former comrades. One could call this a hollow shell of a guild, a relic of past glories. This was the incarnation of those days. This was the staff of Ain's Ul Gown. He did not want to let this weapon and its memories of their golden days stay here to be a painful reminder of the past. Yet, contrary thoughts wormed their way through Momonga's heart. Ain's Ul Gown had always decided things by use of a majority vote. Momonga might have been the guild master, but his job was mainly communicating with people and doing other minor tasks. Because of that, now that there were no other guild members present, for the first time Momonga thought to exercise his powers as the guild's leader. This is a pretty sad state of affairs. Momonga muttered to himself as he operated his player console. He intended to equip himself in the gear that best suited the leader of a top-tier guild. Yggdrasil's equipment was classified according to how much data each item possessed. Items with more data were ranked higher. From the lowest to the highest rank, they were low class, middle class, high class, top class, legacy class, relic class, legendary class, and what Momonga was currently selecting, divine class. On his 10 bony fingers he wore 9 rings, each with a different ability. Then there was the matter of his necklace, his gloves, his cape, his shirt, and his circlet, all of which were divine class items as well. If they had a price, it would be a jaw-dropping one. The flowing robe which covered his torso was grander than the one he had worn earlier. A red and black aura rose slowly from beneath his feet, and at a glance it seemed extremely ominous. This aura was not the result of any skill Momonga activated. It was simply because there had been extra room in the robe's data capacity, so the special effects data for a disaster aura had been added into it. Touching that aura would not cause any harm. In the corner of Momonga's vision, he could see various indicators which showed his stats increasing. After changing out his gear, the fully equipped Momonga nodded, satisfied that he looked the part of the guild's leader. Then he reached out and grasped the staff of Ain's gown. As Momonga grasped the staff of Ain's gown, it radiated a nimbus of reddish-black light. Tormented faces occasionally coalesced out of the roiling light, and then they crumbled and vanished again. They looked so realistic one could almost imagine them wailing in agony. I wonder if they went overboard with the details. The staff that had been made but never used had finally found its way into its rightful owner's hands in the twilight hours of Yggdrasil. Momonga rejoiced as he saw his parameters rising rapidly, but at the same time he felt sad. Let's go, symbol of the guild. Or no, my symbol of the guild. Part 2. Momonga left what was known as the Round Table Room. Guild members had a ring reserved for their use. Anyone who wore that ring would automatically appear in this place when they logged into the game, barring special circumstances. If any guild members returned, they would do so in this room. However, Momonga knew that the other members of the guild would not be coming back here. In the last few minutes of the game, the only player who remained in the gigantic Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick was Momonga himself. Momonga suppressed the emotions that were rising like a tide and walked through the halls. This place was like a castle built of alabaster, a magnificent world suffused with a regal atmosphere. If one raised their head to look to the ceiling, they would see crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling at fixed intervals, radiating a warm light. The broad hallways had brilliantly polished stone floors, which reflected the light from the chandeliers in a way that made it seem like twinkling stars were embedded in its surface. If a visitor opened the doors on both sides of him, his attention would be captivated by the decadent furnishings within. A third party observing this scene would probably be staring in awe. The much-hated Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick had once been attacked by the largest invading force ever assembled in the game's history. 8 guilds banded together with their allies to bring a force of over 1,500 players, mercenaries, and NPCs to bear on Nazarick, but in the end, they had been miserably defeated. That legendary dungeon was now reduced to this. The Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick had once been a 6th-floor dungeon, but it had been dramatically altered after Ain's gown took control of it. Currently, it was a 10-floor dungeon, and each floor had its own unique theme. The 1st to 3rd floors were modeled after a tomb. The 4th floor was an underground lake. The 5th floor was a frozen glacier. The 6th floor was a rainforest. The 7th floor was a sea of magma. The 8th floor was a wasteland. And the 9th and 10th floors were the realm of the gods, in other words, the home base of Ain's gown, which had ranked among the top 10 of Yggdrasil's thousands of guilds. The sound of Momonga's footsteps and the tapping of his staff rang through this holy sanctuary. After turning several corners in these vast hallways, Momonga saw a woman in the distance heading in his direction. She was a sensual beauty whose lush golden hair grazed her shoulders. She was dressed in a long, elegant maid's outfit with a large apron. She was roughly 170 centimeters tall, with a slender build. Her ample bosom looked like it would burst out of her bodice at any time. Her overall appearance was attractive and gave the impression of being graceful and kind. As the two slowly approached each other, the maid darted to the side of the hallways and bowed deeply to Momonga. In return, Momonga raised his hand in acknowledgement. The maid's expression remained as it was, and she kept the same smile on her face from just now. In Yggdrasil, facial expressions did not change, but this girl was slightly different from player characters with their unchanging expressions. This maid was a non-player character. She was not controlled by the game, but by a set of AI routines. Simply put, she was a mobile doll. Even if her design was incredibly realistic, her bow is nothing more than a programmed action. Momonga's acknowledgement of her beau was nothing more than a foolish gesture, because she was nothing more than a doll. However, Momonga had reasons for not treating her coldly. There were 41 maid NPCs in the Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick, each with their own unique design. Their creator was a mangaka who had broken into the industry with his maid illustrations, and who was currently serialized in a monthly magazine. Momonga studied the maid carefully. Apart from her looks, he also scrutinized her uniform. The intricacy of the design, especially the fine embroidery that speckled her apron, was enough to make people gasp in awe. Their design had been exceptionally detailed because of the declaration, "Maid uniforms are their secret weapons." Momonga couldn't help but feel nostalgic as he remembered the complaints from the other guild members who had helped with the design. Ah, that's right. I think it was from then that he started saying that maid uniforms are justice. Come to think of it, I think the manga he's drawing now has a maid as a main character. Do his assistants cry when he goes overboard on the designs? Ah, White Brimmer-san. The maid's AI routines had been programmed by Hiro-san and 5 others. In other words, this maid was the personification of his past friend's hard work. He could not simply ignore her without feeling bad about it. After all, this maid was also a part of the glorious history of Ain't Soul Gown. Just as Momonga was contemplating these matters, the maid raised her head as though she had spotted something and tilted her head in surprise. The maids would do this if anyone lingered around them for longer than a certain period of time. As Momonga searched through his memories, he could not help but be impressed by Hiro's elaborate programming. There should have been other hidden poses programmed into them as well. Momonga wanted to see them all, but time was very tight. Momonga glanced at the translucent watch on his left wrist and checked the time. As he thought, there was no time for him to spend waffling around. "Thank you for your hard work." Momonga walked past the maid after that painful farewell. As he passed the maid, there was no response, but that was only to be expected. Still, even if she did not reply to him, Momonga still felt that it had to be said, because it was the last day of Yggdrasil. Momonga continued forward, leaving the maid behind. After a while, a gigantic staircase appeared before Momonga's eyes. It was wide enough that over 10 people could walk down it side by side, arms outstretched, with no problems. A luxurious red carpet lay on the steps. Momonga slowly descended the stairs until he reached the lowest floor, the 10th floor of the Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick. The place where he had arrived was a large receiving room with several figures within. The first to enter Momonga's line of sight was a distinguished old gentleman in a butler's outfit. His hair was pure white, even the beard and mustache near his mouth. However, the old man's back was ramrod straight like a sword forged of steel. His face was deeply wrinkled and gave onlookers the impression that he was a kind and gentle person, but his keen eyes were like those of an eagle sizing up its prey. There were 6 maids standing behind the butler. However, these maids were different from the one Momonga had met earlier in looks and equipment. The maids wore gauntlets and greaves of gold, silver, black, and other colored metals. Their armor was designed to look like the outfits of maids in manga. They did not wear helmets, but instead white headdresses. In addition, every girl was armed with a different weapon. They were the very picture of battle maids. Their hairstyles were also varied. They wore their hair in buns, ponytails, long and straight French curls, and so on. The one thing they had in common was that every single one of them was attractive. The exact way in which they were attractive also varied within them. One was sporty and athletic, one resembled a demure Japanese maiden, one of them had a seductive allure, and so on. These girls were NPCs, but they were distinctly different from the other maids who had simply been designed for entertainment. Their purpose was to defend against invaders. In a game like Yggdrasil, guilds enjoyed several benefits if they possessed a guild base of castle tier or higher. One of these was NPCs for base defense. The NPCs that the Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick could field were undead monsters. These automatically spawning NPCs, or pop monsters, had a maximum level of 30. Even if they were destroyed, after a while they would respawn on their own at no cost to the guild. However, players could not customize the AI and appearances of these pop NPCs. As such, they were hardly useful in deterring intruders who were universally players. There was also another type of NPC, the ones designed from the ground up to their maker's satisfaction. If a guild possessed a castle-grade guild base, the owning guild would be allowed 700 levels to be distributed between any number of NPCs they wanted. Because the highest level in Yggdrasil was 100, by those stipulations, a guild could make 5 level 100 NPCs and 4 level 50 NPCs, or any combination thereof. When designing an original NPC, one could customize weaponry and other equipment in addition to clothing and appearances. As a result, one could create NPCs that were far stronger than the automatic spawns and place them in key locations. Of course, not every NPC had to be designed for battle. A certain guild which called themselves the Kitty Kingdom fielded no NPCs other than cats or cat-related creatures. In this way, each guild could freely determine their unique style. Momonga placed his thumb on his chin and looked at the butler and maids who were bowing to him. Momonga typically used teleportation magic to move through the various rooms, so he had not had many chances to come this way. Looking at the staff filled him with nostalgia. He reached his hand out and touched an invisible menu, opening a page that only guild members could see. Then he selected an option from several choices. As he did so, the names of the butlers and maids appeared over their heads. I see. So that's what they were called. Momonga laughed softly at himself for forgetting their names, and also because of the fond memories they brought up in him. There had been quite a few arguments between his colleagues when they had chosen names for the NPCs. The butler, Sebas's design was that of a house steward. The 6 maids beside him were combat maids loyal to Sebas. Together, they were called the Pleiades. In addition to these maids, Sebas was also in charge of the tomb's manservants. The text box for Sebas contained more detailed information, but Momonga did not feel like reading it. The servers would shut down soon and he had to be somewhere before then. As an aside, all the NPCs apart from the maids were also very well fleshed out. This was because the guild members were all fans of complex backstories and details. Many of the guild members were artists and programmers, and a game like this which emphasized the customization of appearances, allowing them to indulge their desire to create and design, was a godsend to them. Originally, Sebas and the combat maids were intended to be a last line of defense against invaders. However, if enemy players could penetrate this deeply into the tomb, they would be able to handily defeat Sebas and the maids, so they were little more than speed bumps to buy time. However, no player had ever made it this far, so they had been waiting here for orders. Without orders, all they could do was wait for a chance to be of use. Momonga tightened his grip on the staff of Aints Ul Gown. He knew it was foolish to feel pity for NPCs. They were nothing more than a collection of electronic data, and the closest they could come to real emotion was a very skilled set of AI routines. However, as guild master, I shall put the NPCs to good use. Momonga could not help but laugh at himself for that incredibly lame line, and then he gave them a command. Follow me. Sebas and the maids bowed respectfully, to show they had heard and acknowledged the order. Leading them away from this place was not what the guild members had intended for them. Aints Ul Gown was a guild that respected the will of the majority. It was forbidden for an individual to selfishly manipulate the NPCs that everyone had made together. However, this was the day when the curtains would fall on everything. Given that, everyone would probably forgive his indulgence. As Momonga thought about this, he continued moving forward, followed by the sounds of many footsteps. Eventually, the group arrived at a vast hemispherical dome-shaped hall. 4 colored crystal lamps glittered from the ceiling, and there were 72 niches in the walls. Most of them were filled with statues. Each statue was modeled after a demon's appearance, and there were 67 of them. This room was called the Lemegeton. It was named after the Lesser Key of Solomon, which was a magical grimoire. The statues in the niches were designed to resemble the 72 demons mentioned in that book, and in truth they were golems made out of extremely rare magical alloys. There should have been 72 of them, but there were only 67 because their creator got bored of the project and quit halfway. The 4 colored crystal lamps on the ceiling were a type of monster, and the moment an enemy entered their range, they would summon high-ranking elementals of earth, water, wind, and fire, in addition to bombarding them with area of effect attack magic. If these crystal lamps all attacked at once, the firepower they unleashed could easily defeat 2 parties of level 100 players, which would be roughly 12 people. This room could be said to be the final defensive line of the great underground tomb of Nazareth. Momonga led the servants behind him past the magic circle and laid eyes on the giant doors before him. The majestic set of double doors were over 5 meters in height and covered in intricate carvings. The left side was shaped into a beautiful goddess, while the right was made to resemble a cruel demon. So realistic was their design that even from across the room, Momonga thought that they would attack him. Still, while the carvings looked like they could move, Momonga knew that they had never moved before. Since they made it all the way here, we should gather in glory and welcome these brave heroes. Let others slander us as they will, but we shall welcome them proudly and openly, like the magnanimous lord that we are. That idea had been passed in accordance with the majority vote rule. Albert Elaine Otto. He was arguably the most obsessed with the idea of evil in the guild. Was it because of Chunibu? Momonga felt that way as he looked around the large hall. Will these 2 statues attack? He was right to feel so uneasy. Even Momonga did not fully grasp the secrets of all the mechanisms in this dungeon. It would not be strange if one of the retired guild members had left a strange sort of present for him, and the one who had designed this set of doors was just such a person. In the past, he had designed a very powerful golem, but shortly after activation, a flaw in the combat AI made itself known and it attacked everyone around it. To this day, Momonga still had his doubts about whether that mistake had been on purpose. Hey, Lucifer-san, if they really attack me, I'll be mad, you know. However, Momonga's caution in reaching for the doors was unfounded. As he touched them, they opened by themselves, although they did so slowly, in deference to their massive weight. The air changed. Although the atmosphere from earlier was filled with quiet solemnity, the scene before his eyes now exceeded that by far. The air became a pressure that weighed heavily on the entire body. It was an exquisite piece of work. And in this wide, high room, even packing several hundred people inside would not make the room feel crowded. The high ceiling and the surrounding walls were a predominantly white color, with golden decorations as highlights. The numerous chandeliers which hung from the ceiling were made of precious stones of all colors of the rainbow, and they emitted a fantastic, dreamlike radiance. Numerous flags emblazoned with different symbols hung from flagpoles sunk into the walls. A total of 41 of these flags swayed gently in the wind, from the ceiling to the floor. In the center of this room that was tinted gold and silver, there was a flight of stairs about 10 steps high. Atop these stairs was a gigantic throne carved out of a single piece of crystal, whose back was high enough to touch the ceiling above it. A huge red banner hung down behind it, proudly displaying the symbol of the guild. This place was located in the deepest reaches of the great underground tomb of Netherrick. It was also its most important place, the throne room. Oh! Even Momonga could not help but gasp at the sheer magnificence of this room. He felt that it was easily the second most impressive location in Yggdrasil, if not the first. This was the most suitable place for him to welcome the final moments of the game. As Momonga advanced through the room that seemed to absorb the sounds of his footsteps, his eye fell on the female NPC that stood by the side of the throne. She was a beautiful woman who wore a pure white dress, and the faint smile on her face was that of a goddess. In stark contrast to her dress, her hair was a flowing, lustrous jet black that reached down to her waist. Although her golden irises and vertically slitted pupils were somewhat odd, apart from those she could easily be considered a world-class beauty. However, a pair of curled horns sprouted from the sides of her head. In addition, a pair of black feathered wings emerged from her waist. Perhaps it was because of the horns, but her divine smile seemed like a mask that concealed her true feelings. She wore a golden necklace that patterned after a spiderweb. It extended from her shoulders down to the tops of her breasts. Her slender wrists were covered in a pair of lustrous silk gloves, and in her hand she held a strange weapon that looked like a wand of some sort. It was roughly 45 centimeters long, and a black orb hovered at its end, floating lightly in the air but holding its position at the end of the wand. Momonga had not yet forgotten her name. She was the overseer of the floor guardians of the great underground tomb of Nazarick Albedo. She was in charge of the 7 NPC floor guardians. In other words, she was the highest-ranked character in the great underground tomb of Nazarick. Because of that, she was permitted to await orders within the throne room in the deepest reaches of the tomb. However, Momonga turned a sharp look on Albedo. I knew there was a world-class item here, but how is it that there are 2 of them here now? In Yggdrasil, there were 200 ultimate items in the game, known as world-class items. World-class items possessed unique abilities, and some of them were so balance-breaking that they could even request changes to the game's rules by the developers. Of course, not every world-class item possessed such insane power. Even so, a player who possessed even a single world-class item would be catapulted to the highest echelons of fame in Yggdrasil. Ainsvoulgaun possessed 11 items of them, the most of any guild. Even that was far in excess of any other guild. The guild in second place only possessed 3 such items. With the permission of the other guild members, Momonga was allowed to possess one of these ultimate items, and the rest of these world-class items were scattered throughout Nazarick. However, most of them were stored in the depths of the treasury, defended by its avatars. The only reason why Albedo could possess such a rare treasure like this without Momonga's knowledge was because the guild member who designed Albedo had given it to her. However, since today was already the last day of the game, Momonga felt that he should respect the wishes of his comrade who had given the item to Albedo, and so he did not take further action. This is a good place. Momonga's words were directed to Sebas and the Pleiades as they reached the base of the stairs leading to the throne. After that, he began climbing the stairs, but stopped when he heard footsteps behind him. Momonga could not help but laugh, although his skeletal face could not show any expressions. The NPCs were merely inflexible AI routines. If he did not give a specifically worded command, they would not recognize it as an order. Momonga had forgotten this and thus he had not properly commanded the NPCs. After his guild members left, Momonga had begun solo hunting by himself to a nearly ridiculous degree in order to earn the gold needed to maintain Nazareth. He did not build friendships with other players and avoided them, as well as the high difficulty areas he used to visit when his guild members had still been around. Then he would deposit his earnings in the treasury before logging out. This had been his routine for almost every day. As such, he did not have much contact with the NPCs. Stand by! The sound of footsteps stopped. After Momonga gave the correct command, he ascended the final steps and arrived at the throne. He stared openly at Albedo, who stood by its side. Though he had entered this room before, he did not recall her eyes tracking him in his memories. What kind of backstory was she designed with? All Momonga knew about her character was that she was the overseer of the Guardians, as well as the highest-ranked NPC in Nazareth. Driven by curiosity, Momonga opened up a console and began scrolling through the details of Albedo's flavor text. A flood of densely packed characters filled his vision. It was like reading an ancient epic poem. If he took his time to read it in detail, he would probably still be reading until the game ended. Momonga felt like he had stepped on a landmine. If he could move, he would have been trembling now. He wanted to scold himself for having forgotten that Albedo's creator was obsessed with this sort of thing. However, since he had already opened it, he had no choice but to abandon his resistance and continue scrolling. He didn't even skim the text for the important points, he simply scrolled to the bottom as fast as he could while looking at the title. After skipping past vast expanses of text, Momonga's mind settled on the last line and froze. She is also a slut. He could not help but stare. What does this mean? A cry of disbelief escaped Momonga's non-existent lips. He looked the words over several more times, eyes filled with suspicion, but in the end he could not find any other meaning to them. After several rounds of thought, he could only come to the conclusion he had started with. A slut, it must be an insult of some sort. Each of the 41 guild members had designed their own NPCs, so he could not understand why anyone would want to treat the NPCs they had designed themselves in this manner. Perhaps he would understand why after reading that long essay of flavor text. However, there were guild members who would come up with these unconventional designs. Albedo's designer, Tabulus Maradina, was one of those people. Ah, is this what they call Gapmo? Tabulus, and even so? Isn't a backstory like this far too much? Momonga could not help but think that all the NPCs made by everyone were an inheritance of the guild. Designing the highest-ranked NPC Albedo in this manner made him think that Tabulus Maradina was beyond saving. Would it be fine to change an NPC's backstory based on a personal decision? After thinking about it for some time, Momonga came to a conclusion. Should I change it? Currently, with the guild weapon in his possession, Momonga could be said to be the master of the guild. It should be alright to exercise the guild master's authority he had never used before. Momonga's doubts vanished like mist as he steeled himself to right the wrongs of his guildmates. He extended the staff of Ain's wool gown that he was holding. Normally, one would need developer tools to change a character's backstory, but through his power as guildmaster he could directly access her settings and edit them. After some action on his console, the slut line vanished. Well, it should be like that. Momonga thought a bit more and looked at the gap in Albedo's flavor text. I should probably fill that up? This feels a little silly. Although he was laughing at himself, he still typed out a few words on the console keyboard. The words formed a sentence. She loves Momonga. How embarrassing. Momonga covered his face with his palm. It felt as though he were designing his ideal girlfriend complete with love events for himself, which embarrassed him so much that his heart began pounding. Although he wanted to rewrite it again out of shame, in the end he changed his mind and decided against it. The game would end soon, after all, and his shame would vanish with it. Besides, the sentence he added matched the gap left by the deleted sentence exactly. It would be a shame if he deleted it and left an empty space again. Momonga sat on the throne, scanning his surroundings with eyes filled with satisfaction and a little embarrassment. He noticed that Sebas and the maids were still standing by in a dormant state. It seemed a little lonely and a little odd to have them standing motionless like that. I think there was a command for that. Momonga recalled the words he had heard before and extended a hand before lightly bringing it down. No. As one, Albedo, Sebas, and the 6 maids fell to one knee in obeisance. Momonga raised his left hand to check the time. 23:55:48. He was just in time. In all likelihood, the GMS were probably flooding the public channels and setting off fireworks. Momonga, who had put his heart and soul into this place and cut off all contact with the outside world, was unaware of that. Momonga leaned against the back of the throne and slowly raised his head to look at the ceiling. He believed that even on the last day of the game, some invaders might come to Nazareth. He would wait for them. He would accept any challenges in his position as guildmaster. He had sent emails to all